Good morning, everyone.
Morning, ma'am.
Just check that the main parties are here.
Morning, madam.
Good morning. Okay, the time's now 9:30 and I shall resume this inquiry into the appeal made by Dignity Funerals Limited against the decision of Doncaster Council to refuse planning permission for a crematorium, including memorial gardens, car parking, a new vehicle access onto Green Lane and ancillary works at land south of Green Lane, Brodsworth, Doncaster. This is the fourth day of the inquiry. Just the usual reminders, you know the score by now, to switch off mobile phones or change them to silent. I had the attendance sheet for yesterday. Thank you for that. And if the attendance sheet for today could be sent through, that would be good. We aim to break for lunch around 1 p.m. And finish it all possible by 5 p.m. Particularly given it's a Friday, with suitable breaks mid-morning and mid-afternoon. Yesterday, Mr. Village had just commenced cross-examination of Mr. Mitchell, and that will continue this morning. I will then ask my questions, after which Mr. Robson will re-examine the witness. This afternoon, I anticipate that we'll hear from Mr. Hodgson. We need to see where I can get. And there is a potential on my timings that Mr. Hodgson may have a hangover over the weekend in terms of his evidence, which I'm sure we would want to avoid if at all possible. But we'll need to review that closer to the time. I have to say, in terms of the timetable, I had another look at it last night. It's not looking promising at all to finish next week unless things speed up somewhat. I mean, in terms of our current trajectory, I anticipate we'll hear from Mr. Lathbury and Mr. Best on Tuesday and Wednesday morning. Planning issues on Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, and to be honest, we may be lucky to finish the planning evidence, never mind closing submissions on Thursday. So it isn't looking promising. There is still potential the option of sitting on Monday. I don't know if there are any views on that. I know Mr. Village wasn't keen, having a shake of the head. But there are the other thing I was going to ask participants to do is to review their timescales for evidence in chief and cross-examination, and see if there are any time savings that could be made, and submit them through to me probably by close of play this evening, and then I can review the timetable over the weekend and publish that and see where we are. So yes, and on that first point of sitting on Monday, can I take views on that, please, starting with the council?
Morning, ma'am. Unfortunately, I'm not available on Monday. I have two other things in the diary that I can't move. Sorry, ma'am.
That's fair enough. That concludes that discussion fairly promptly then. And in terms of offering up, sort of revised estimates for the inquiry, for the remainder of the inquiry, is that something that parties can have a look at? I'm sure with your combined significant experience, I'm sure that you can apply your minds to look at ways to hone the cross-examination skillfully in order to reduce the cross-examination time. Some of the times do seem excessive. So I shall leave that with you. Are there any obvious points at the moment where any obvious sort of areas where advocates feel that the cross-examination can be trimmed? Mr. Barrett?
Well, 2 points, ma'am. The first point is I think I'd certainly be able to trim it in respect of Mr. Lathbury or Lathbury, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, because I'll be following on Mr. Robson, and actually on reflection, the matters that I have to take up with him, I think, will be much diminished. So I'm thinking in 15, 20 minutes. In respect of the Mr. Best's evidence, again, I'll be following Mr. Robson. In my estimate, had assumed that I would be cross-examining at some length. Now, I know there will be a significant overlap between me and Mr. Robson, but we do have discrete cases. So whilst I will be able to shave some time off, my expectation is not a great deal. But I raised my hand to flag up one particular issue, which you touched upon in your opening remarks a moment ago. Mr. Jameson is my witness on need. He's also obviously an important member of the team and the person responsible for instructing me. I'd be very reluctant to start cross-examination, Mr. Jameson, unless that cross-examination could be finished on the same day. Otherwise, he'll be impaired over 3 days, the full weekend and Monday, by the looks of things. I'm sure, madam, you're conscious of the same difficulty, and I'm sure Mr. Village has had the same experience in other cases. So if we can, although we are under the cosh in terms of timing, I'm happy to have Mr. Jameson give his evidence in chief, but unless we can start and finish cross-examination, I'd be reluctant to embark upon cross-examination unless we are confident that we could finish it, without in any way trying to be unfair to Mr. Village whatsoever.
Yes, I mean, that's why I flagged it up, because I looked at the timescales last night and it was looking increasingly likely that that might be the case, unless there's potential to save time in cross-examination this morning, Mr. Village. I mean, just turning to thank you, Mr. Barrett, for your suggested ways of saving time. In the interest of cooperation, can I hear from the other advocates in terms of the potential for time savings? Can I ask the council first, please?
Thank you, ma'am. I mean, certainly, Mr. Lathbury. At the moment, I think I'm down for 60 to 90 minutes. I would expect it to be much closer to 30 minutes. I think Mr. Lathbury in his proof of evidence says that he relies upon his independent professional experts on planning, landscaping, and need. He adds some discrete points. I mean, it would be 30 minutes max, I would hope, with Mr. Lathbury. Mr. Best, I've got 90 minutes, ma'am. I think it will be 90 minutes. Obviously, need is a fundamental part of the case. And Mr. Williams' cross-examination, I think 2 hours may be too long. I will have a look at my plan for Mr. Williams. I suspect that will come down. Okay,
thank you. I mean, I appreciate there needs to be some flexibility. It depends how the cross-examination's going. So yes, I do appreciate that. So thank you for your time savings, Mr. Robson. Mr. Village, are you able, in the interest of cooperation, to offer any savings in terms of the timetable?
Well, actions, I think, speak louder than words, and I was shorter with Mr. Taylor by about an hour than I anticipated I would be. But as I reiterate, we're not here to spin things out unnecessarily. I was going to mention, though, that so far as today is concerned, that I was rather hoping that we'd be able to finish slightly earlier today. You said, I think, 5 o'clock, but I was rather hoping we might be able to finish by 4:30, because I want to take advantage of a doctor's appointment, which is free at the end of the day today, and I haven't been able to get to see him all week, and it would be really good if I could do that, because otherwise it's sort of, I've got the same problem next week, and he doesn't have any appointments on Monday. So if you could bear with me on that, I'd be very grateful. But I don't actually disagree with anything that any of my colleagues have said, really. I don't mind hearing from Mr. Hodgson in chief. If we can't get him finished in time, then I agree that it's sensible to push it over.
obviously that would extend the timetable. So I guess I'm looking for you to offer up a saving somewhere too, if possible, Mr. Village.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm trying my best, consistent with doing justice to my client's case. But I did suggest right at the outset, to hope I don't sound like a know-it-all, but that we would probably need an extra 2 days, and I think that still is my view. I know Mr. Robson can't do Monday. I can't do Monday. I don't think Mr. Barrett can do Monday, so I think we're all in the same boat about Monday this week. We are sitting Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week, and I don't think Mr. Barrett can do Friday, and I'm certainly in some difficulty on Friday as well, and I'm going away on holiday actually on first thing on Saturday morning, so I would be very grateful if we weren't able to sit on Friday, so I could actually pack a suitcase.
I'm very jealous, Mr. Village. I think I'm feeling in need of a holiday too.
Probably wouldn't do that anyway.
So, Mr. Village, can I leave that with all of the advocates? If you can put your revised timescales in writing to me, and I'll amend the timetable over the weekend. And send it to parties on Monday, and let's see where we are. But my feeling is potentially, even with the time savings, we may end up using at least 1 or 2 of those days that we have in reserve currently. Which, just to point out, obviously the target date for the case is the 2nd of December. So that will impact on my reporting time, and it's unlikely that the target date for the appeal will be met. So just to obviously flag that up. So okay, well, if you could do that by the close of the day, that would be really helpful. Thank you. And obviously you don't want to delay too much. So just in terms of other matters, is there anybody else here today who may wish to speak, who hasn't already indicated that they would like to? I can't see the third parties here today. Any other procedural housekeeping matters? I think I only had the one. I noticed that the YouTube channel does now have the recordings on. I always avoid watching them because they're rather painful, but they are on there. So that's good. Thank you to the council's team for that. Any other procedural housekeeping matters before we start? No. In that case, Mr. Village, you may recommence your cross-examination of Mr. Mitchell. Good morning, Mr. Mitchell.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, Mr. Mitchell.
Good morning, Mr. Village.
So I think where we got to last night was an agreement that it is no part of the council's case that there will be any existential threat to Rose Hill through a lack of viability. And you appreciate, Mr. Mitchell, that when people talk about viability, it's got to be in terms of an existential threat. The fact that there is a reduced profitability is nothing to the point. For the purposes of the planning system, but what might be a material consideration would be if a facility closed, for example. And you're nodding your head in assent with that proposition. Thank you. And I think it good. Well, that's helpful. Thank you. It goes also without saying, and I think we've been through this already to a certain extent, that you're not suggesting that there would be any existential threat to Barnby Dun.
That's correct.
Okay. But I mean, I have to return to this point, I think, just to be clear about it. If we turn to your needs assessment, please. So that's the November document.
Yes.
I took you to a document which you had not seen before, which was the officer's report to committee. And I put it to you that in fact the decision in that case was very much influenced by the suggestion that if Barnby Dun was permitted, and also Brodsworth, that the former would not be viable, and that was therefore that counted against Brodsworth being permitted. That do you remember that?
Yes, that's the wording of the report.
That was the wording of the report. So thank you very much. It was a very fair wording of the report. Now, your response to this, because of course the position now is, as a matter of agreement in the Statement of Common Ground, that Barnby Dun would be viable. Its viability would not be affected by the grant of planning permission in this case. Your responses are, well, that's not what I intended, because of course the assessment that you undertook only looked at a 30-minute drive time. If I understood your position correctly there.
Yeah, I caveated my remarks about compromising viability with the statement, whilst these figures relate to constrained 30-minute drive time catchments and do not include potential cremations originating from outside of that limit, they do show significant impact upon cremations at Rose Hill.
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't say anything was unviable. I just said sufficient to compromise, and there you go.
Well, I'm not sure. We'll have a look in a moment. I'm not sure that's actually completely accurate. But anyway, let me just take you through the document. What you did was you identified a number of scenarios, and the scenarios, there were 8 scenarios, and I think the inspector can see those, can't she, at paragraph 8.50 of the need assessment.
Yes.
All the scenarios you tested were based on 30 minutes. Yeah.
Yes, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair to say, Mr. Mitchell, you didn't test anything at 45 minutes, did you?
I've got figure 18, for example, shows the 30 minutes figures. It also shows 15 minutes and 45 minutes. I think for the first.
Yes, that's true, but I was talking about testing these scenarios And as far as I can see, they're all tested at 30 minutes.
This is the scenarios of what if there's one new crematorium or two, or
Well, the scenarios are set out as 8.50. Scenario 1 is existing.
yes,
So that's base case. So scenario 2, existing plus Brodsworth. 3 is existing plus Conisbrough. 4 is existing plus Barnby Dun. 5 is existing plus Brodsworth and Conisbrough. 6 is existing plus Conisbrough and Barnby Dun. 7 is existing plus Brodsworth and Barnby Dun. And 8 is existing plus Brodsworth plus Conisbrough and Barnby Dun. So you, in fact, perm all three proposals against each other and the existing, don't you?
yes,
And the ones I want to look at for the present purposes are 1, existing, 2, existing and Brodsworth, 4, existing and Barnby Dun, and 7, existing plus Barnby Dun and Brodsworth. And then the way you do this is the table at 8.88. You look at populations. Is that right?
yes.
Is that your dog or someone else's?
Yeah, I've got a young puppy, and we'll see what we can do to let him know that it's not an appropriate time.
Well, he might incur the ire of the inspector. So, well, I don't think, for my part, we'll just ignore him. I don't think he can do very much with the puppy.
I think it's a sign of the times, having to give evidence from home that there are going to be things like this. I have had one of my children popping up in the background on one occasion. So I think if we can just try and proceed, and obviously if there are any ways that you know, the dog can be pacified, that would be fantastic. Thank you. But Mr. Village, if you can just persevere, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I will. Okay, so so what you then, we're going to look at these the assessments though. Just going back to this, Mr. Mitchell, you don't assess any of these scenarios, any of these permutations against 45 minutes, do you?
That's correct.
Yep.
Yes, the 5, 6, 7, and 8 are 30 minutes only. Well, they're all 30 minutes only. Once in figure 42.
Yeah, yeah, and then 8.88. You're just looking at populations, not actual cremations. And then what you do is you test the crematoria against a threshold of a population of 120,000, don't you?
Yes.
Someone's got their camera on, just joined us. There we are. And the explanation for that 120,000 testing, as it were, is given by you at well, I think it was a figure that was put forward by the 8.91, I'm being told. Yeah. Yes, the current Thank you. The current FBCA guidance population figure of 120,000 for a crematorium to be viable. So this is a viability assessment, wasn't it? It was one of two viability assessments you did. The other one based on actual numbers of cremations. This one is based on populations.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate to refer to the FBCA guidance. Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah. The FBCA guidance is in fact it is quite dated, isn't it? What's the date of it?
I think that latest revision is
2011.
2016, is it? I
thought it was earlier than that. I thought it was 2011. But I mean, in any event, if the cremation rate increases, and you've taken a figure of 80%, but if it increases, it's clear that the population necessary to support that would reduce, wouldn't it?
Yes, I believe it was. I'm reading my paragraph 896. The 2016 edition of the FBCA document talks about crematoria undertaking 1,000 or more cremations, and I think that is also the document referring to the 120,000. And yes, I think their figure for population, which was originally years ago 150,000, I think it actually is all about coming up with a figure of about 1,000 cremations, because the death rates have changed. So when they said 150,000, the applicable national death rate gave you 1,000 cremations. I think they've revised it down in the light of declining death rates, so that you only need 120,000 people and you have 1,000 cremations potentially.
Right.
But yes, you're right. This is subject to fluctuations in cremation rate, so that if the cremation rate rose significantly, then presumably the catchment population wouldn't need to be as high as 120,000.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. And if we turn to 8.92, which is your...
Yes,
you've got that, 8.92. And this gives the answer to the question, which is the best crematorium of the applications before the council, based on that 120,000, because what that shows is that with Brodsworth, the population would be 136,933. With Conisbrough, it would be 128,000, and Barnby Dun, it would be 98,000.
that's right.
Yeah. So in fact, of those three, based on that metric, that way of calculating it, clearly Brodsworth came out the winner, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Although that's not, in fact, stated by you in your report, is it?
No, that the figures are there in front of us, and I'm comparing. This section is looking particularly at what happens if you build 2 or 3 crematoria and the difference between them. But yeah, the figure is there, quite clear for all to see.
Well, I mean, 8.93 it states what figure 43 illustrates, but the most important piece of information from that figure 43, I suggest to you, is that Brodsworth, in fact, comes out on top if one compares it against the 120,000. Yes.
Does that? I believe.
Yeah, but you didn't mention it. You didn't.
From recollection, I would need to look for it. I think I do refer elsewhere in the report to 30-minute drive time catchment, first time served, that sort of thing. And so there are alternative ways of looking at the numbers.
Well, that's a different metric, and that doesn't in fact go to the issue of viability. This point goes to the issue of viability, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes. I mean, so let's not confuse. Let's not confuse our way of calculating different aspects of this. This point goes to the issue of viability, and on that metric, the 120,000, Brodsworth was out by some considerable margin in front of Barnby Dun.
That's correct.
Yeah, and it's also right to say that that Rose Hill would retain a population of 157,000 if Brodsworth was
That's right.
developed. Now, of course, Rose Hill is an existing crematorium, and so this issue of whether or not as to the effect on viability is complicated by the fact that one may have a matrix which deals with viability for a new crematorium, but for an existing crematorium where you have sunk costs and you're simply dealing with variable costs such as labour and so on, the issue of viability is going to be considered in a different way, isn't it?
I'm not aware of any published guidance on that. But yes, it's a different situation. I know that periodically, whoever owns the crematorium, at some stage or other, you require another input of capital to do something major, like extend it or change the cremators, and that carries on every so often. Every crematorium's got to invest some more money in it, but I'm not aware of any. This guidance is referring to new crematoria. I'm not aware of guidance referring to existing.
Exactly. This is referring to new crematoria, and it's clear that even with Brodsworth, and if you just take Brodsworth and Barnby Dun and Rose Hill still is only just below the 120,000 figure at 116,000 on this basis.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, Mr. Mitchell, what these figures don't do is they are not based on the position in 2034, are they?
No, they're not.
No. I mean, we're going to come on to this. You'll be unsurprised to learn in a bit more detail, but the fact of the matter is that you do, in fact, in this need assessment, project forward.
I do.
At one stage in them to 2043, don't you?
Yes, I use ONS 2018 base population projections.
Yeah.
To do a simple what happens in 2043.
Yeah. But what you don't do is you don't make any assessment based upon projecting those figures forward to either 2034 or 2043, do you?
No, those figures in figure 43, no, I don't.
Why not? Why didn't you do that?
I chose not to. I presented the figures. It seemed appropriate to leave them as they were.
Well, you say it seemed appropriate to leave them as it were, but I don't think that can possibly be right, Mr. Mitchell, can it? You told the inspector in your late evidence document that you, in fact, accept the principle of forecasting forward.
Yes, and in my need assessment report, my first section talks about, I'm sure I've got a section talking about demography, future increases. This has to be considered.
Yeah, but so why therefore didn't you do so?
I just didn't. I projected something else further forward. I think, was that capacity levels?
Well, we'll come on to it in a moment. I'll take you to it. But and clearly, in terms of assessing, need, that failure to project forward is a flaw, isn't it?
It could be seen as that.
Sorry?
It could be seen as that, yes.
It could be seen as that, yeah. Okay. Right. Now, and just going back then to set figure 43, in fact, what we see from this document, this table, is that actually it's fair to say that Brodsworth exceeds, in terms of population, every other crematorium, doesn't it?
Yes, within a 30-minute drive time catchment.
Within, yeah. Okay.
I'm using the 30-minute drive time catchment because it's referred to in every planning application, planning appeal regarding a crematorium. People latch onto it as being of great significance. So I used it for this analysis.
Well, I think it's fair to say, if you're making that point, Mr. Mitchell, that you yourself see the benefit of using 45 minutes in rural areas, don't you?
Yes, and I've used, what's the word, minimum drive time catchments in addition to 30 minutes in my proof of evidence.
Yeah. Okay, now let's look at the other metric of examining viability, please, Mr. Mitchell, which is the 800 cremations a year, which we've already agreed relates to new crematoria. And table 8.98, what we see at 898 is you simply, this is simply based upon populations, isn't it? So this is populations, I think.
Figure 44.
Sorry?
Figure 44 at paragraph 898 refers to deaths.
Yes, it does. Sorry, you're quite right. It refers to deaths. And the next,
these are
45 that relates to cremations. Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Yes, so I'm deriving cremations as a calculated figure. So the numbers in cremations figure 45
are 80% of.
Are 80% of the figures in the previous table.
Correct. Right. So then, so anyway, 898 gives us the number of deaths projected in 2018, and then to figure 45, you calculate the 80% cremation rate. We'll come on to discuss that cremation rate a little bit later, if we may. And
sorry, Mr. Village, I'm terribly sorry. You broke up for a second there and I missed the reference.
Mr. Village, can you repeat the reference for Mr. Robson?
Yes, of course. 898.99 is what we're looking at now.
Thank you.
8.9. We were looking at paragraph 8.98, figure 44.
Yes.
Which is the 30-minute drive time identifying deaths within the 30 minutes. And then at figure 45, we're looking at cremations, which, as Mr. Mitchell's just explained, is simply a calculated figure of 80% of the deaths.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I missed the reference. Thank you.
No, it's not fun. And Mr. Mitchell, let's have a look then at scenario 2, which is reminding ourselves scenario 2 is with Barnby Moor and with Brodsworth, but not Barnby Dun. We can see that Brodsworth is doing 1,160 cremations, according to you, based on 30 minutes. Barnby Moor is doing 424, and Rose Hill is doing 1,183. Is that right?
Yes.
And Barnby Moor at this stage being at a very early stage of its, I think it had opened in 2018, but it hadn't been open for very long.
But these figures don't reflect the
actuals. No, they don't.
This is purely derived from this magic software that identifies which people, which areas are within the catchment of one crematorium or another, identifies how many there are, identifies how many deaths there are. So those figures for Barnby Moor in 2018 are what it would have done if it had been occupying that discrete catchment, as in discrete from Babworth. These are the numbers of deaths that would have occurred in 2018 in that area, and I've allocated them to their nearest crematorium within a 30-minute drive time.
Quite. Okay. But anyway, we see that Rosehill and Brodsworth both trading healthily in that scenario. Then scenario 4, which is Barnby Dun and Rosehill. Rosehill reduces to 1,094.
Yes.
And Barnby Dun does 825.
Yes.
So again, according to you, just marginally viable in that circumstance. And then scenario 7, which, as we know, is Barnby Dun, Brodsworth, and Rose Hill. And one can see that Rose Hill reduces to 862, Brodsworth is 1160, and Barnby Dun reduces to 550. Yes?
That's correct.
And it's for that reason that you concluded that Brodsworth, if you included Brodsworth, it would render Barnby Dun unviable.
Those weren't quite my words, as I keep pointing out, but it would compromise the viability based upon a 30-minute drive time, based upon cremations originating within a 30-minute drive time of the crematorium. It would compromise the viability of the crematorium.
Yeah, well, 8.101, I mean, we've been through this last night, but here you say you make the point that they relate to the constrained 30-minute drive time, don't include potential cremations originating from outside that limit. They show significant impact on the cremations at Rose Hill. If 2 or more of the 3 proposed new crematoria were developed, cremation numbers would fall more significantly at Rose Hill, sufficient to compromise its continuing viability. And then similarly, the viability of the proposed new crematoria could be affected if 2 or more were developed. If Brodsworth and either Barnby Dun or Conisbrough were developed, Brodsworth would appear to still attract sufficient cremations to be viable, but the viability of the other is doubtful.
Yes.
And if Conisbrough and Barnby Dun were developed, Conisbrough would appear to attract sufficient, but the viability of Barnby Dun is doubtful. And so that's really where the author, and of course what you didn't do is you didn't then go on to test the position at a 45-minute drive time, did you?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. But you can see why the officer made the summarize the position in the way that she did in the officer's report about viability based on what you told her.
Yes, my caveat has not been included.
Well, your caveat wasn't included, and it's fair to say it would have been meaningless to have included the caveat without doing the calculation. Wouldn't it?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I'm saying these within this drive time catchment, the calculated cremations are X, which has a significant impact, etc. But it's all very much within a 30-minute drive time catchment.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. But if you were to, had you made the position clear, you would have had to have included. In other words, if you were to say, look, that's the position at 30 minutes, you didn't go on to say, however, I've now calculated the position in relation to 45 minutes, and the position is as follows, did you?
That's correct.
Yeah. And it's because you now take account of the 45 minutes that you advise the inspector and sign up to the statement of common ground to say that Barnby Dun would in fact be viable.
That is correct.
Yeah. So we can see how crucial this 45-minute point was.
Yes.
Yet you didn't state it in. You didn't state that it was crucial to determining viability in your report, did you?
No.
And that was a flaw, wasn't it?
I concede that could be seen as a flaw, not given the complete picture.
Do you want to apologise to the council and also Dignity for that flaw?
At the time, I focused upon the 30-minute drive time catchment because it's been held at appeal to carry great significance. It's appropriate to do that, and I caveated my remarks. In hindsight, and having redone the whole thing and included minimum drive time catchment, I can see that my report would have been better had I done this for my need assessment report.
Mm. And the answer to my question is?
If there is an apology due, then I make that apology.
Okay, thank you. Right, now I'd like to turn to some...
Sorry, Mr. Village, to interrupt. Can we just focus on the evidence, please?
Yep.
Rather than the need for making apologies. You made your point and we can move on now. Thank you.
Yep. I am moving on to need issues. Qualitative need and quantitative need are interrelated, aren't they?
Indeed.
Thus, a quantitative deficiency will often give rise to a qualitative deficiency, won't it?
Yes.
And this is often seen or often manifested by excessive delays for a convenient slot.
Yes.
A convenient cremation appointment, I should perhaps say. I'm sorry to call it a slot. I don't think that sounds very, no disrespect is intended by using that word.
No, we end up using words like that on a professional day-to-day basis, and we just have to accept that. Yes, I use delays between death and funeral in my reports as an indicator. This is what all these need reports are doing. They're looking for indicators of need, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, and people have developed things to look at. We've looked at drive time, catchment, populations, deaths, and all the rest of it. It's something to latch on to. Similarly, delays between death and funerals. Yes, I commonly examine those and relate them to what people regard as reasonable. And as with capacity percentages, they're an indicator that there is a problem, that there is insufficient capacity to deal with funerals, so that you're making people wait.
Yeah, just in your experience, please, Mr. Mitchell, what's the tipping point in terms of a delay for and I'm going to use the word now, given what you've just said, in waiting for a convenient slot? What's the tipping point?
That I can't give a tipping point, but I can give examples whereby it's all about why do I want to go to this particular crematorium? And I think that if I've got good enough reasons to choose a particular crematorium, and in discussion with the funeral director, we try and arrange the funeral at a convenient time, and he tells me, well, yes, I can take you to that crematorium. You want to be there in a core time of the day. I can understand why. However, we can't get a slot for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I think from what I've seen, people wait. If they really want to go to that crematorium, they just accept the delay. But you can't put a percentage on, you can't put a figure on, well, what proportion of those people would then say, 4 weeks, I can't wait that long, let's shift to another crematorium. But I think it becomes very relevant when you have busy, established crematoria, people are used to going to them. Dad was cremated there, Mum lived relatively close, let's go there. If I find out that I've got a long delay and I'm not happy, and the funeral director says to me, well, there's a new crematorium, it may be a little bit further to get to, but let's try them, and they can have the funeral, host the funeral within 2 weeks, then I think quite a few people would say, okay, then let's go there. And I think that's an important factor with new crematoria.
Yes, I mean, I was really, though, seeking to establish what the tipping point for delay was. I mean, I appreciate that your customers, if that's the right expression, or the bereaved, will have to make a decision as to how long they're prepared to wait, and if they're not prepared to wait for a slot which is in, say, 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time, they may wish to go elsewhere. I understand all that. What I was driving at, however, was what you consider to be the tipping point in qualitative terms. How long is it reasonable to expect the bereaved to wait for a slot? I'm leaving aside the fact that they can indeed either just put up with it or they can go elsewhere. But how long is it, in your experience, is it reasonable to wait for to make the bereaved wait?
Mr. Best refers to my evidence to the Turner's Hill planning inquiry, and I did some work there looking at obituaries. You know, I'm not associated with crematorium companies or funeral directors, so I rely on things like obituaries. And in some cases, there's very few to choose from, and in others there's more. But in analysing the crematoria in that area, bearing in mind it's the densely populated southeast, I was deeply shocked at how long some people are waiting. And on average, we were looking at delays of 24, 25 days between death and funeral. And people accept this because they ultimately have no choice. That is the situation across a wide geographical area. So they have to put up with it. As for what is reasonable,
yes,
that's a subjective judgment.
Well, that's actually what I'm getting at. I'm sorry. I mean, I appreciate that people do have to put up with it, but what I'm asking you is, what is in your view, in terms of in qualitative terms, how long is it reasonable to expect? Before you have to conclude, actually, this is not providing a quality service that the bereaved demand in this area. How long, in your view? Is it 7 days, or is it 14 days, or is it longer?
I think if you have to wait longer than 2 weeks, that's certainly, to have to wait 3 weeks is completely undesirable. I was going to say unacceptable, but you have to accept it. There's no choice. Having to wait for 2 weeks is not as bad, but it's far from ideal. If you could have a funeral a week after the death, perhaps that would be ideal. But one has to recognise that people's circumstances and feelings vary, so that actually they might not want to have a funeral in the next week. As I previously said, I've done a lot of work with the Muslim community, and as we know, they and the Jewish community want to have the funeral the same day, or certainly within 24 hours. That's part of their religious requirements and cultural traditions. For them to have to wait longer than that, it is a serious issue to do with fundamental norms in their community. Whereas the wider population, if you like, we've got a greater tolerance. My understanding is the waiting time between death and funeral in Northern Ireland is very short indeed, and I haven't looked into why that is, but it's got to be related to capacity. If the capacity exists and everybody could have a funeral from 1 to 2 weeks after the death, then I think that would be a good situation. I accept that is not happening in many places. It's not just Doncaster, it's not just the southeast. It seems to me that the areas that I look at, clients in various places, delays of 15 days and more are common, and 25-day delays are not uncommon.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you. So, I mean, what I'm going to, if I may, summarise what you've just said by saying that to wait, I think you said 2 weeks or more is far from ideal, and
yes.
and that in fact what you would say is that in qualitative terms you would be looking for a cremation service or funeral a week after the death, but certainly no more than 2 weeks. Does that?
Yes, unless there were specific circumstances.
Unless, I mean, obviously, if the family say, look, we've got to get so-and-so's got in Australia, or we've got to get him back, or this, that, the other, there are particular problems about post-mortems and
exactly.
so on. There are other issues.
Yes, the statutory forms.
Statutory forms. There are other issues which can get in the way. But if everything else is equal, so far as the cremation part of it is concerned, you're really looking at a week, but a maximum of 2 weeks. And what's clear is that the delays are very much greater than that 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks in this area, aren't they?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah. And I think yesterday I think you described it as, well, you agreed, or whether you agreed, you asserted, and we agree, that Rosehill is presently substantially overtrading.
Yes, as are the other crematoria in the area, essentially.
As are other crematoria in the area. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Now, in terms of the assessment of need, I mean, incidentally, that issue that I just mentioned, the issue of waiting times, is not the only indicia of qualitative a lack of quality.
Yes, that's right.
Because the style of the crematorium, its age, and also the dreaded conveyor belt approach that basically one might effectively find yourself catching up with someone who's just about to leave, or someone who's about to go in a completely unrelated service.
Yeah, and in my opinion, the wait between death and funeral is a serious issue, and closely followed by whatever time we've had to wait. And when we finally arrive at the crematorium, if we feel we're on a conveyor belt, that really is very undesirable indeed, and an indicator that things aren't good at all at the crematorium.
Yeah, and that also manifests itself in other ways. So, for example, the amount of car parking available for mourners coming to the funeral, and if there is a sort of effectively back-to-back services, then you get traffic congestion and difficulty for mourners to find a car parking space and so on. So those are other aspects.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Okay. And sorry, seems to be a bit of feedback coming in somewhere. I'm not sure what this. To me, anyway. And then, as I mentioned, the style of crematorium. We know that a number of the crematorium in this area, in fact, most of them, are in fact were constructed in the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
And frankly, they, without wishing to be unduly unkind, but they certainly don't, in terms of their style, they don't lift the mood of what is otherwise a very sad event in any event.
Yes, I included pictures of the crematoria that I gathered from the internet in my need assessment report, and one of the common issues is that they were designed at a time for particular needs, and they were designed in a certain architectural style or styles of the period. They had car parks designed to cope with what they thought would be a suitable amount of traffic, and they've since had to be extended. So you start with a building that is no longer of contemporary style, and then you compromise it by making changes to it, additions to it, and then you have to increase the car parking somehow, and in many cases you can't increase it. And certainly a key factor, this is where the service interval, the service slot, not the actual funeral service time, but the slot in which you hold it, where that is vital. So in the past, where I worked at crematoria with 30-minute service intervals, it was traffic congestion and people milling around and being on a conveyor belt was a daily experience.
Yeah.
And so that's more likely to happen at an older crematorium whose physical facilities are not as good as a contemporary crematorium, and where they just can't, that they're so busy they can't extend the funeral service interval time.
Yeah, and obviously you've read Mr. Lathbury's evidence, and you will understand the importance which Mr. Lathbury and Dignity give to having 1 hour slots. Indeed.
But even they aren't able to introduce them at all of their crematoria as much as they would like to, purely because of this issue of coping with the quantitative demand.
Well, I think the position is, and I'll probably be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think the position is that certainly in relation to all new build crematoria from Dignity, they all run on 1 hourly slots.
Yes, I believe that's the case.
I mean, I think there are, I think you're right to say that there are crematoria which Dignity have taken over, which were previously local authority owned or run, where the slots are shorter than that. But there are just 2 points that arise out of that. Firstly, I think you would accept, Mr. Mitchell, that the 1 hourly slot is in this day and age what one should really be seeking to achieve in order to provide a good qualitative provision.
Well, it's interesting. I think you use the word customers. Customers, bereaved people, they're not all the same. They've got different needs. If you have a 60-minute service interval or even longer, then that minimizes the chances of 2 consecutive funerals meeting each other in the car park or in the buildings. And this allows them to have it varies depending on which crematorium's price list you read, but it's assumed that people are going to be able to have this 40-minute actual funeral service, and there's still that 20 minutes left over either side to get out of the car, get to the building, say hello, use the loo, and then after the service to say hello to everybody, then get back in your car and drive away before the next funeral comes in. So that is, as it were, the gold standard, and it's beyond the ICCM target. But a point that I think is relevant, it's not necessarily required for everybody. Some people, I was quite surprised to see the high proportion of funerals coming into Rose Hill where they've had the actual funeral service somewhere else. So they may have had countless hundreds attending the funeral service, but just a few close family turn up for some brief words of committal. They get out of the car, walk to the crematorium, go in, the vicar says the words of committal, they go out, get in the cars and drive away. And that's all they want to do. Now they should similarly have privacy and feel that they are the only people on site at that time. That's excellent, but you don't need the full 60-minute service for them. So I think that, and in the Wheating decision, I noticed the inspector there was suggesting that having 60-minute service intervals was wasteful of resources because not everybody wanted them, and the standard, as it were, was 45 minutes. So why offer longer? I can't say I entirely agree with him on that point, but yeah. I think that ideally we would offer a mix of service intervals to suit people's particular requirements, and the funeral directors would, I mean, this is what I discovered on crematorium price lists. This is now becoming increasingly common, and the funeral directors adapt to it. They know that, for example, the 11:30 service is a 60-minute service, and they book that one because that's what this family need, whereas another family want a shorter service, and the 10 o'clock one is whatever it is, and they book the 10 o'clock one. And this is reflected in the price. So arguably everybody wins with that flexibility.
Yeah. Well, sorry, have you finished?
But a full service in the crematorium, a 60-minute service interval, is definitely to be preferred. Right.
Well, that's very helpful. Now, I mean, obviously, I mean, from the inspector's point of view, she needs to identify a sensible basis for measuring, to measure where the need arises, and I don't think there's any dispute, is there, that for analysing where the real pressure points arise, you should be looking at the peak months. In other words, the sort of the January, February sort of the months to identify where the need arises.
That was certainly what came out of the Essington appeals, with which you're very familiar on a personal level, and which I quoted.
Level, I have no interest in them whatsoever, but I did happen to be there.
Yes, so you're very aware that that was the conclusion, and in my tables ever since, I show the technical capacity, the practical capacity, and then the practical capacity in the peak month. And there are significant differences between them. I notice again the inspector at Wheating was not convinced by this idea of peak month. He felt that, well, if you work to 80% of your practical capacity, then you had a bit of slack to deal with busier periods. But most people seem to accept that one should factor in peak demand, and certainly I do that.
Yeah, I think you and I probably are on the same page, Mr. Mitchell. I'm glad to say that I had nothing to do with the Wheaton decision, but it's a bit of an outlier in terms of the approach of the inspector, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that deals with that, and I think the position is, just again in summary, that if you're going to assess what the need is, you've got to do so by reference to the peak months rather than the standard months, because obviously if there's a peak demand, that has got to be catered for one way or the other.
Yes, and I've taken that on board to the extent that I don't simply use a single figure for the average peak across England and Wales. I go to enormous lengths to using the drive time catchment software. I know which local authorities contribute to each catchment, and so I spend ages looking at their actual deaths month by month in a 4-year period in order to, as accurately as I can, calculate the peak figures for that particular crematorium.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, that's good. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on, I just want to sort of get familiar, or I'm sure you're very familiar, but to ensure that that we have agreement about this and the inspector understands the terms, just want to go through a number of the terms that we need to use. And I mean, the first is the theoretical capacity of a crematorium. And I suggest that the theoretical capacity is the capacity if every single slot it's the capacity based on every single available slot.
That's right, and I think I make a note reference to this in my need assessment. I certainly normally do, that if you ring a crematorium and say, oh, how busy are you? What is your capacity? They will always say, oh, we've got loads of spare capacity. Yes, we've only got X number of slots today. You could have 4 others if you wanted. Oh, yes, we're not working at full capacity. But what they're looking at is this technical capacity. And, you know, you would never work to your full technical capacity.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. So what we have got now is a way of looking at it based upon what's referred to as the factored or the practical capacity, which is based upon the usage of core hourly slots. And I think I'm right in saying, Mr. Mitchell, that that's the subject of agreement in the statement of common ground. Could you just turn that up, please? Statement of common grounds on need is.
I think it's A7. Oh, sorry, that's landscape. Sorry.
A9, yeah.
A9, yeah.
Yeah, and if we turn in that to
(2.7). No, factored capacity, yes.
no, that's not, I mean, helpful, yes, but I was actually looking at 2.9.
2.9.
And that tells us the factored or practical capacity of the crematorium is based on its maximum capacity. If every single core hour slot is used for a cremation, it's agreed that annual calculations should be based on 252 operating days per annum. The PMA figures in table, I think that should be table 2, because there isn't a table 3, show the 4 existing crematoria, each operating 8 core hours per day. This means that each crematorium has a factored capacity of 2,016 slots.
Yes. The Rule 6 party is in broad agreement.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well that's now it's accepted, isn't it? And this is evident from the statement of common ground itself, that a crematorium operating above 80% of its practical capacity makes it difficult to offer a cremation service.
Is that in the statement of common ground?
Well, I think I said it's evident from the statement of common ground, and the reason it's evident is because if you turn to page 8, this is a section entitled Need Matters in Dispute. And it says further need matters disputed by the Rule 6 party only, and then turn over the page to 3.7. Whether a crematorium operating above 80% of its practical capacity makes it difficult to offer a cremation service that provides an acceptable qualitative standard. So Mr. Hodgson does not accept that a crematorium operating above 80% of its practical capacity makes it difficult to offer a cremation service that provides an acceptable qualitative standard. However, you don't take issue with that proposition, do you?
I accept it in the sense that it's been accepted by the Secretary of State regarding the Essington decision, and it's a very useful threshold by which to assess capacity. I don't know, nobody else that I'm aware of has come up with a better way to assess the capacity of a crematorium and to reach a threshold where you say it's now too busy. I accept it in that way. I think in my rebuttal statement, I was saying, well, actually, if you do apply this to UK crematoria, you've got a ridiculously high number that fail to meet this threshold, that exceed this threshold. So in the back of my mind, it does make me think, well, is it, yes, it's accepted, it's very useful, I use it, but is it something that you can apply absolutely and rigidly? Is another matter. I think that's open to interpretation, but I certainly have agreed to it in the statement of common ground. As I say, there's nobody else is offering anything else that's been endorsed by the Secretary of State. I mean, it obviously applied to that particular situation at that particular appeal. And I think that this is one of the key things that I think I've already mentioned about trying to meet the needs of bereaved people, the requirements, the wishes, they are very variable. So having this 80% threshold, it's extremely useful. It's whether it's an absolute 100% all of the time true statement, who knows? But it's very useful.
I just want to unpack a number of things you just said, if I may. I mean, the first point is that, yes, in your rebuttal statement, you did question the 80% in the sense that you identified that there are, in fact, a lot of crematoria which are significantly overreaching that 80% threshold. And I would simply say to you, and so you say, therefore, you question it, but I'd simply say to you, well, yes, there are indeed many crematoria which are exceeding the 80% threshold, but that's entirely consistent, isn't it, with the findings of the Competition and Markets Authority in terms of the lack or the dearth of crematoria to meet the needs of the population and communities that should be served by one. So the first point is, yes, a lot of crematoria are exceeding the 80%, but that simply goes to endorse what the CMA say about the need for more.
Yes, and I think I'm right in saying in the CMA report, they quote the FBCA saying that they see that there is a need for another 10 crematoria. I think I'm right in saying that. And, you know, based upon what we're talking about, 10 is very much an understatement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just taking this area itself, I mean, the very last thing that you said last night before we sort of signed off, well, sorry, I think the very last thing you said in your evidence in chief, I beg your pardon, the very last thing you said in your evidence in chief was that there is in fact I mean, leaving aside Barnby Dun, which is being built now, there is a need for another crematorium. In fact, I would suggest to you that there may be a need for more than one crematoria to serve the Western Arc area.
Yeah, those crematoria are using this 80% standard. Very busy. This is also, I think it's supported by the letters from the 3 dignity funeral directors referring to delays between death and funeral.
Yeah.
The Western Arc crematoria are definitely very busy.
Yeah. Such that there is, in fact, as you said yesterday, rightly said, there is a need for further crematoria, and I suggest that maybe that there is a need for, when we come to look at the figures in due course, at least 2.
There may well be.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, we're just going back to where we are on this issue of the use of the 80% figure. I mean, as you rightly say, endorsed by the Secretary of State at the Essington Worgs inquiry. It's something you agree with, and because you say, in fact, no one's come up with any better way of judging where that there is where it's possible to say the tipping point of a qualitative service has been reached. In other words, that there is a need for a qualitative improvement, and so you're content for the inspector to make the decision based upon that 80% figure, as I understand it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I've used it in my late submission to assess the impact of the three new crematoria upon the capacity levels at Rose Hill, and I'm saying this is a really good thing. Look, it goes below the 80% level, so I think it is important. It is useful.
We'll come on to that in due course. I'm just establishing some of the parameters at the moment. But I mean, I have to say, your rebuttal isn't seeking to row back from or effectively sideline that 80%.
No, it's just giving the context to it.
Yeah. Okay.
And in particular, going back to what I was saying about service interval times, yes, a standard is really good, and a gold standard of 60 minutes must be a good thing, but it's not necessarily something that you can impose everywhere. And the fact that all these people want committal services at Rose Hill affects this 80% figure, so it's a bit awkward. But yeah, I'm just giving the context to that.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I'll just add a bit more context that the figures in relation to the core slots, which are in the statement of common ground at table 2, I mean, those are all based on not the gold standard of 1 hour, but they're all based on 45 minutes, aren't they? Or 40 minutes. 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I'm sorry. Yeah, they're all based on 40 minutes. Right. Okay. So I'm just going on to a new topic now, madam. Don't know whether that might be a convenient moment to break. We're going for an hour and a half.
Yes, certainly. It's approaching 11 o'clock. Mr. Village, can I just ask for a time estimate in terms of the remainder of your cross-examination?
Yeah, well, I think
bearing in mind our discussion earlier.
Yeah, I'll have a. Can I answer that when we come back? I'll have a look through my notes now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then we shall adjourn the hearing and the inquiry until 11:15. Thank you. welcome back everyone. It's 11:15 and we'll recommence the inquiry. Hope everyone's managed to get a cup of tea. Mr. Village, you said you'd get back to me in terms of an estimate regarding how long the rest of your cross-examination will be. Can you give me
yes, madam. I think it'll finish somewhere between 12:30 and 1 o'clock.
That seems longer than your original time estimate. Just giving a. Can you tell me why it's longer than your original time estimate?
If you want the honest and unvarnished truth, it is that I had assumed that the answers to my questions would be given in rather shorter order than they are, but obviously I don't want to incur your wrath by cutting the witness off in any way, so I've been careful to not to interrupt. And in fairness, I have to say though, Mr. Mitchell is a helpful witness, and I don't really want to cut him off, because quite a lot of what he's saying is in fact just I think will assist you. But and these things are, you know, it's an art, not a science. I mean, there's a bit of science to it, but
Indeed. Well, Mr. Village, if you can be mindful of the time, I didn't particularly want to go beyond your original time estimate of 3 hours. Mr. Mitchell, are you there?
I am indeed.
Could I just add, I'm not seeking to throw Mr. Mitchell under a bus in any way by blaming the length of my cross-examination on his answers. I mean, I'm just speaking, as it were, to the reality of it.
Well, Mr. Village, I do appreciate you being polite and courteous and in not talking over the witness. That is appreciated. Mr. Mitchell, if you could just be mindful of Mr. Village's comments then, perhaps giving slightly shorter answers to the questions. Obviously, you're entitled to qualify your answers, but just be mindful of the timescales, and hopefully between yourselves we can have a slightly shorter cross-examination without undermining the quality of the discussion. So if you could both bear that in mind, that would be useful. Thank you. Mr. Village, would you like to commence?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, Mr. Mitchell, as I say, I'm not in what I've just said isn't intended to be in any way critical of your evidence giving this morning. Right. So if we just go back then to the issue of actually, I think it's in the statement of common ground that we need. I seem to have somehow mislaid. Thank you. Marked out. The figure of 2016 slots in paragraph 2.9 if we apply the 80% figure to that, that brings it down to 1,612, doesn't it?
I'll not double check your maths. It sounds.
Well, it's there for all to do. 2016 times 0.8 gives you just, I've rounded it to 1612. So in the context of those crematoria where the core, or the core slot capacity is 2016, that is the threshold capacity, if I'm going to put it like that, is 1612, and it's clearly the case, and I think maybe a little bit of misunderstanding between you and Mr. Robson about what I said in my opening submissions, but in a number of times you have referred to effectively trading up to 80% figure, and therefore saying, well, actually it's not, we haven't gone beyond the 80% figure, and therefore effectively everything's all right. But my point is slightly different, and maybe that I just didn't put it very clearly, but my point is this, that 80% figure is in fact a threshold over which one should not be crossing in qualitative terms. Do you understand?
I perfectly understand that.
So therefore, I mean, to say, well, you're at 60%, I mean, happy days if you're at 60%, because that demonstrates that there's quite a lot of, there's some ability to provide a qualitative service to the bereaved. So the inspector should approach it on that basis, really, effectively seeing that the 80% is the threshold figure over which you shouldn't really be stepping. There is a further point I just want to explore with you, and that's the ability for crematoria like Rose Hill to increase their or improve their qualitative provision by changing their slot times so that they can provide hourly slots.
Yes.
Okay. And that's again a qualitative benefit to improve. I mean, one can effectively. I mean, obviously it's a decision for the individual crematorium, but it's a way in which fairly easily the crematorium can increase its qualitative offer simply by changing the slot times to an hour, so therefore you don't get the conveyor belt.
That's right, they could do that.
Yeah.
But the downside is that they've now reduced their capacity to, in terms of the total number of funerals they can hold. So this is going to increase the waiting times for people between death and funeral, etc. So well, yes, it's a great thing to do. But as I said, even Dignity find that you can't always do it.
Yeah, I get that point, but I mean, my point is that you would only do this if, in fact, you had the capacity to do so.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So the fact that the capacity is reduced isn't necessarily a bad thing if one's looking at providing a quality service, because it allows you to give a longer service time and improve the quality that way.
Yes, indeed, I fully agree.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, right now, turn back to the statement of common ground, paragraph table 1, and bearing in mind what we've just agreed, that the 80% figure is represented by a figure of 1612.
1612.
Do you want? I'm not being funny.
I'm sorry, I'm not brilliant at mental arithmetic. If it's 1612, that's.
Well, try to check it. By all means, do. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable about the figure if you aren't. Just to check that it's correct.
So well, I'll accept your figure.
And what I've done is I've just done a sort of I put a sort of separate column down on the statement of common ground just to work out what the figures are for each of those. So in relation to Rose Hill, it's presently, this is of course in 2019, and we're just, and obviously, unfortunately, we're doing this based on existing cremations rather than having factored it up to 2034. But the 2379 minus the 1612 indicates that it's over trading by about 1,270 cremations. Is that right?
1612 slots. I'm sorry.
It's 2379 minus 1612.
2679. 2679. Okay. Sorry, do carry on.
Well, I mean, I'll go through all of them if it would be helpful. In fact, I want to do that, but it's for Rose Hill, it's over trading by 1,270 cremations. Barnsley by 517. Rotherham by 363, and Pontefract by 398.
Could you tell me your number again for Rose Hill?
Yeah, it's Rose Hill it's over trading 1270.
270. So if I
hang on, wait a minute, just give me a second. I beg your pardon. Don't know why I got that. It's 767 Rose Hill. So
trading by 767. So that means if I put the 1612 figure into my sheet and I ignore direct cremations, I find it comes out at a level of core capacity in the peak month of 123.3%.
Are you effectively doing some Excel?
Yes.
You're doing it on.
So I've got.
Just show me which table what table you're altering there.
I'm actually working on the table that is at figure 1 in my late submission. So I've got the 4 years 2016 to 19. So I've just subtracted your 767, by which you believe Rose Hill is over trading, from the 2379 cremations that it did to arrive at 1612. and I've put that in the total cremations column. I've removed any direct cremations, and then I've got the 2772 slots available, giving in that year 58% technical capacity. I've got 2,268 core slots, giving a 71% practical capacity. But then we factor in the peak month. I've got average.
Sorry to interrupt you. Would you mind just starting all that again? Because I've only just literally managed to catch up with finding this table. It was, so just go back to the beginning if you wouldn't mind.
So if we look at, there's
So
four
your figure
columns. Yeah, there's 4 columns headed year, 2016
Yeah.
to 19. The figures are there.
Yeah.
And the figure above the red one, above the red line, total cremations in
Yes.
2019.
Yeah.
If I change that figure to 1612, that's the result of subtracting your 767 from the number of cremations that it actually did. I'm just using this as a calculator. I end up, yes, I've got 1612 cremations in that 2019 total cremations. I go down, and in the grey line, I've got 50 directs. I've just deleted those. So my annual cremations are 1612. Total slots available 2772. It changes the level of technical capacity down to 58.2%. The total course slots in a year 2,268. That changes the level of practical capacity to 71%. And those course slots divided by 12 is 189 a month. And so that leads us to the final figure in the bottom line of practical core capacity in the peak month of 123%.
Well, it's 123% at the moment, I believe, isn't it?
Let me have a look. There may be a fault.
Yeah, no, it's 123% at the moment. So I don't think that can be right.
AU17. Well, the formulas appear to be correct. Anyway.
Well, I'm not sure what point you're trying to make from this, but I mean, maybe if you just explain that point, what you're trying to show.
You were giving me a series of numbers and coming up, I believe you came up with a percentage figure at the end. And I was just trying to understand how you arrived at that figure.
No, I didn't actually come up with a percentage figure. All I was doing was looking at the actual overtrading figure. In other words,
The 767.
The 767, the 517, the 363, and the 398. And just trying to get agreement that that represents effectively, of those 4 crematoria, that represents the extent of overtrading if one was to pull it back to the maximum practical capacity figure of 80%.
I think to save time, I'll say I can't fully agree with your figures because I've quickly checked one and I can't match it. It doesn't mean that you're wrong.
What?
But
which figure was that? Was that the first one? The figure should be 767. I'm afraid it was my fat fingers on the calculator which gave me the wrong answer.
Yes.
Right. So the figure is.
You gave me a figure of 767.
Yeah. Do you want to do the maths? Do you have a calculator there?
I'm just looking at. Yes, I'm sorry. There is a fault in my sheet which is not enabling me to do this properly. Let me.
Well, don't worry about that, if I may respectfully suggest, because I'm not really asking you about that at the moment. I mean, in due course, if it's necessary, you and I'm very happy for you and Mr. Best to produce something that's revised. But I just want to, at the moment, I think you've frozen, madam.
Mr. Village?
Sorry, madam, I think you froze. Sorry, I didn't.
May have been at my end. Now, I just wanted to, before you carry on and we lose our train of thought, I just wanted to clarify the purpose of that exercise so that my understanding is right. So the table 1, the statement of common ground, shows actual cremations at existing facilities at 2019. What you're saying, Mr. Village, is that applying the practical, the factored capacity to and bringing it back to 80% shows a degree of over trading.
Yes,
which would be 767 at Rose Hill. Is that right? So it's looking at applying the 80% figure to the actual number of cremations.
exactly right, madam. And the figures are, I think sorry, madam, I'm afraid that you've frozen again. And I'm not sure whether you what you were saying, whether I was interrupting you.
I did hear that you confirmed that my conclusions were right on that. I do have the figures, so you don't need to go through those. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you.
May I just say, when I apply 80% to the 2379, I get 1903. Am I missing something here?
80% to the what?
The inspectors said, are we applying 80% to the number of cremations?
No. What the 80% figure is the 1612. That's 80%. We agreed firstly. So I'll just go through it again in line by line. Firstly, we agreed that the 4 crematoria have a factored capacity of 2016 slots. That's paragraph 2.9 of the statement of common ground.
Okay.
Right. 2016. We apply 80% to that figure, which brings us down to 1612.
Yes.
And I was simply asking you the difference between the figure given of number of cremations against the 1612. The 1612 figure is the 80% figure for each of those crematoria.
I see. Yes. Okay. So I get it's 1612.8 and it's 766. So yes, similar number. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Are you happy about what I've done?
I'm understanding what you're doing now.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
So it's a way of working out the overtrading at each crematorium in terms of the number of cremations.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And now, I think before we go on to, we will come back to that in due course. Don't put that too far away. We'll come back to it. Before we do so, however, I just need to check a number of other points with you. First of all, the increase in death rates. The figure first of all, you've accepted as a matter of good practice that one should apply an increase in death rates and that to take it to the year 15 years after the assumed opening of 2030 to 2034, which is the figure that Mr. Best has taken. It could be slightly later, but the figure we're happy to take 2034 for present purposes. The figure, the increase is 16.4%. Do you disagree with that or agree with it?
I believe it to be true.
Thank you. So that's appropriate for that to be the figures be increased, the death rates to be increased to 16.4%. Can we agree that?
Yes.
I mean, it may be helpful to the inspector, entirely up to her, but if we can, if there are matters of agreement that we can, after this cross-examination, you and Mr. Best can get together, we can produce a supplementary statement of common ground that may be helpful. I won't say any more, but I just leave that thought. You, in fact, as we've already noted, in your original statement of need, you looked to a year of 2043. Was there any particular reason that you took 2043, please?
It was the fullest extent of the ONS population projection. They caveat them by saying all sorts of things, but they're a useful guide that are used for planning purposes. So I used the figure for 2043. In due course, they will produce more population projections and take them further forward.
Okay. Anyway, you're happy to take a figure of 16.4% and for a year of 2034, are you?
Yes.
Thank you. The cremation rate is a bone of contention between us, isn't it? You've taken a figure of 80% and Mr. Best has taken one of 85%.
Yes, I don't think anybody possibly can guarantee what the cremation rate's going to be in any given future year. I've suggested caution that it might rise to 85%. I'm not betting on it.
Could you turn, please, to your need assessment, paragraph 6.10.
Yes.
Now, regrettably, over the last 2 years, we've all come used to looking at graphs like this in a different context. But what you've got in your figure 3 here is you've overlaid crematoria development with cremations.
Yes.
And what we can see about cremations is that there is no sign at all at the moment of any flattening off of the graph and the rise in the cremation rate, is there?
I disagree with your statement. That is not the cremation rate. That is the number of cremations. The cremation rate is shown, I thought. I usually do a graph showing that. Yes, figure 2 shows, let's have a look, the proportion of funerals per year. So that's the cremation rate. And it shows a very similar steep rise in the after the Second World War as more and more crematoria were built. So I've tried to give the best information. The number of cremations is rising. The cremation rate is rising.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't mind, frankly. It suits me if you want to use the figure 2, because I make the same point in figure 2. I mean, I granted, it's not as steep as it was after the Second World War in 1942, 1945, but it's still heading in one direction rather than plateauing, isn't it?
Definitely. It does appear that it has an inexorable rise. And the point I wanted to make was, I think that it will flatten out due to these factors that I've listed. Quite how and when it will flatten out is another matter. I just think it's potentially, you've got to come up with a figure. So, 85% is a figure. I can't say whether it will or won't be 85% in the year 2034. I'm just urging caution on absolutely guaranteeing that it will be.
Well, can I put it a different way, if I may, please, Mr. Mitchell? And that is that it's given that the figure at the moment is 80% and has been, I think, for some apologies, I was just getting some better information from those from my betters about this. It was 2004. It was 74.95%, so almost 75%. 2017. It was 79.86%. 2018 is 80.8%. I suggest to you that it is entirely reasonable to conclude that the figure will be at around 85% in 15 years' time, by 2034.
It could be. I'm prepared to accept it. It could well be.
You may not be aware of this, Mr. Mitchell, but in planning, we kind of deal with these sorts of things on a balance of probability, and rather than taking a wild stab. And I would suggest to you that on a balance of probability, it will be around 85%.
Yes.
Thank you.
If it were at that level, it might continue to grow, but as I say, there are factors that mitigate against that, and I think in particular the ageing and growth of the Muslim population and others. We're never going to, in the same way that you don't ever have a crematorium operating at 100% technical capacity, we're never going to get to 100% cremation rate. No. 85% in 2034 may be a reasonable assumption. Whether it stays at that level, who can really predict it accurately? But, it's reasonable.
But you think 85% is reasonable, and on a balance of probability, that's a reasonable basis for making a judgment?
Yes, it's not a guaranteed figure, but it's useful.
I don't think anyone in this forum will be able to, as you say that it's the gospel, if one's allowed to make comments of that kind these days. No one will give 100% certainty. I completely understand that, but I mean, simply just doing our best and looking at given that these are forecasts, what's a reasonable assumption? 85% is a reasonable assumption, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, there's a further issue before we look at the Yeah, before we look at the issue of diversion, I mean, it actually logically comes after the issue of diversion, but it's just a principle that I want to have a look at. And the principle relates to what's known as rebalancing. And I think that this is something which actually you've already given an example of earlier in your evidence. Once one undertakes the trade diversion, and you've done that in your evidence, haven't you? You have provided trade diversion figures in your evidence, and we can see those. And I think you took us to those at figure 22. Is that right?
In which document?
In your proof of evidence.
Proof of evidence. Oops, figure 22. Oops. Figure 22. Yes, I'm there.
And your diversions are given in that figure in red, aren't they?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
For both Barnby, Dunn, and for Brodsworth. So there are diversions to Barnby, Dunn of 827 from Rose Hill, 315 from Pontefract, and 31 from Scunthorpe.
That's right. Yes.
And in relation to Brodsworth, it's 105 from Barnsley, 1,191 from Rose Hill. No, sorry, 364 from Rose Hill, 279 from Pontefract, and 119 from Rotherham. Is that right?
That's right.
Just give me a moment if you. Thank you very much. Now, and those are, if I may describe them as effectively raw diversions. But after those sorts of diversions take place, there is, in real terms, and this requires an element of judgment. So let's get some feedback again here. There is a further process which one has to undertake to effectively acknowledge that the market will, although it will see some raw diversions like that, there will be effectively a settling down and an evening up, a rebalancing of trade as between the various crematoria, and the reason for that is because it's acknowledged that the market will see where the gaps are, where it's possible to go back to perhaps a crematorium which had fallen out of favour because there was too much waiting times and so on. And so there is effectively a further process to be undertaken. And the example you gave relates to what's happening at the moment at Barnby Dun, because I think you said that it was your understanding that there were, in fact, quite a lot of evidence of cremations that would otherwise have been taking place at Rose Hill, now taking place at Barnby Dun.
Yes, Barnby Moor.
I'm amazed I haven't made that mistake many times before in this cross-examination. I'm so sorry. Barnby Moor. Right. That's not surprising, I would suggest to you, at the moment, given the vast overtrading that's going on at Rose Hill, is it?
That's right.
But that is, of course, before the opening of Barnby Dun, isn't it?
It is, but I don't believe that based on the work I've done, I don't think that will reduce the demand at Barnby Moor and Brodsworth.
Well, if I may say so, is entire speculation, because Barnby Dun is not yet open. But I'm going to come to your late evidence in a moment. But before we get there, all I want to do is establish the principle that that as part of the exercise of doing this trade diversion and seeing where the figures will eventually lie, it is important to do a rebalancing and to go through the rebalancing exercise. And just to remind you, this was accepted by the Secretary of State in the Wergs Essington appeals. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Do you take issue with undertaking a rebalancing?
I do, because I think it's impossible. It's an attempt to use numbers to predict what might happen. And what I mean by that in particular is your explanation that you assume that 100% of the cremations that might arise from the minimum drive time catchment will come to the new crematorium, and then in addition 50% of those within a certain drive time in the neighbours' minimum drive time catchment. I think it's an artificial thing, because you will never get 100% of the minimum drive time catchments. I think it's a process of you win some, you lose some, each crematorium catchment. And there are different factors affecting it. I fully acknowledge that a shiny new crematorium with 60-minute slots will tend to draw more cremations than you might expect it to. But I'm not convinced that the calculation methodology can ever account for that kind of human behaviour. I don't attempt to do it.
Well, I know you don't attempt to do it, but please believe me, Mr. Mitchell, when I make the following point, and this is not an ad hominem point, and it's not intended to be in any way offensive or critical of you, but it is that sort of assessment is an assessment which is undertaken day in, day out in the planning process. For example, when undertaking retail impact assessments. by making judgments about where trade flows. And that's the sort of thing that a professional planner is entirely used to doing. Now, as I say, please believe me, I'm not seeking to score any points here, but I'm just pointing out something which perhaps you didn't appreciate, but that's a judgment which a professional planner is well used to making, isn't it?
I wasn't aware of that.
Right, I see. And again, it's perfectly obvious from your own CV. I mean, you don't have any planning qualifications. Again, I'm not making that in any critical way. Just a statement of fact. Yeah, okay, thank you. So, I think just to summarise this point, Mr. Mitchell, you are entirely candid and clear. You haven't undertaken the rebalancing exercise. It's not something that you would be used to doing, or perhaps even comfortable doing, even though it's a recognised, effectively a recognised tool in the assessment of retail impact, for example.
I might be comfortable doing it, making assumptions, but I'd be well, yeah, okay. I wouldn't really be comfortable doing it, because perhaps my own experience of working at crematoria colours my thoughts on the matter. As I say, I think fair enough if that's what professional planners do, fine. I'm saying I'm not convinced by the outcome of that process in what I've seen about crematoria. Anyway. I think my main point is that if it's predicated upon, you start with you're getting 100% of all the cremations in your minimum drive time catchment. I can't agree with that as the starting point.
Well, can I invite you, before you go any further on that, just to go to, I mean, just as a matter of principle, would you go to the decision on Wergs, which is at I think it's at H11. Madam, I hope we've sorted out, or we've now got the Wergs decision in the core documents electronically from the Secretary of State.
I've got H11 open.
Right, so it's a letter addressed to Patrick Downs. Do you have that?
Oh, I've got one addressed to Catherine Evans.
Yeah, that's the Essington one.
That's H11.
Mr. Village, which core document number are we looking at?
Well, it's H11. I mentioned this yesterday. You may recall that unfortunately the original H11 put in the electronic documents had two copies of the Essington decision of the Secretary of State, and it didn't include the Secretary of State's letter on Wergs. So did we? I notice Andrea Sudders has put her hand up. And my learned friend also appeared on the screen, so that it looks as though assistance is.
Mr. Robson?
Yes, ma'am. It's been uploaded electronically as CD 11B. Mr. Mitchell, do you have access to the electronic?
I don't at the moment.
File?
I need a link to get me there.
Ms. Sudders, who's clearly listening, can probably email the document across to you now.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Village, for interrupting.
That's very helpful as usual. And there's also, well, I mean, I'll read out the relevant, what I say is the relevant extract at this stage. The paragraph 6, the Secretary of State said, on 13th of November, the Secretary of State wrote to the main interested parties to afford them an opportunity to update the evidence before them, primarily on need and on any rebalancing of the use of crematoria in the area that may occur should one or both crematoria be developed. So, I mean, basically he's saying that that is something that was undertaken. And then paragraph 19, he said, overall, the Secretary of State agrees there's a substantial, if different, quantitative and qualitative need for both proposals, and that the latest evidence before him demonstrates this remains the case. He gives a bit of feedback again from somewhere, not sure where it's coming from, making sure everyone's got there. Yeah. He gives this significant weight. It was common ground between all the main parties that at least one new crematorium is required to relieve pressure on Bushbury, and that this need amounts to very special circumstances that could outweigh the harm by reason of inappropriate development to the Greenbelt. For the reasons given, paragraph numbers, the Secretary of State agrees with the Inspector that the consequences of chronic pressure at Bushbury would amount to very special circumstances, and also that taking account of the latest information on need and rebalancing, the need for both proposals, this proposal and the Essington appeal referred to in paragraph 1, has increased. He agrees with the Inspector that taking account of rebalancing, the need for both proposals means that very special circumstances exist to justify both proposals. So, I mean, whether one likes it or not, it's perfectly clear that the issue of rebalancing is a highly material consideration so far as the Secretary of State is concerned, isn't it?
Yes.
Even though you're not comfortable in undertaking it.
Yes.
And I mean, and this is more of a kind of a to put the matter beyond doubt, but there was a challenge, as I told you earlier. This document is in the core documents at E14. There was a challenge by Dignity to the first decision of the Secretary of State, not the one I've just been reading from, but the first one, and the grounds of it are set out on page 3 of 51. Ground 1, in reaching his decisions, and in particular in disagreeing with the reasoning of the Inspector, the first defendant failed to take into account the issue of rebalancing. Alternatively, the first defendant failed to give proper, adequate, intelligent reasons on a principal issue identified by the Inspector of the effect of rebalancing following the opening of a new facility at Essington, and in particular the finding as matters of fact by the Inspector, and findings with which the first defendant did not disagree, that the Essington scheme would not relieve pressure at Bushbury to the extent claimed by Westerly, and that the rebalancing factor weighed in favour of the work scheme. And then there were other grounds as well. In fact, there were a total of 8 grounds. And if you turn to document E15. Do you have that?
I don't have E15.
Right. Okay. Well, that again has been uploaded into the electronic documents. I'm sorry that you're.
I've received the email from Andrea Sudders with the other one. If she would kindly email me that one. I've downloaded these documents onto my computer, and
Right.
I've not updated them since the start of the inquiry.
Okay. Unfortunately, inquiries, you tend to find that a lot of documents come in. This was a consent order where all the parties consented, signed by Mr. Justice Holgate on the 23rd of March 2018, and you'll see at paragraph 4 the ground 1 of the claimant's claim contends that the first defendant failed to have regard to the issue of rebalancing. So it's precisely the ground that I have just read out. And if you turn to paragraph 6, the first and third defendants agree that these grounds are well founded, and the second defendant not expressing a view. Specifically, the former agree in relation to ground 1, the issue of rebalancing was deemed a material consideration in the overall assessment of the planning balance by the inspector, as identified in paragraph 236 and 237 of his report, and should have been grappled with by the first defendant, and/or the first defendant failed to consider and failed to give any proper, adequate, intelligible reasons in relation to the issue of rebalancing. Well, you can see that subsequently the Secretary of State clearly did have regard to rebalancing. Those documents are now, I put those in. But I mean, I think for present purposes, all we can agree now, can't we, that rebalancing is an issue which clearly, like it or not, does have to be undertaken.
Yes.
Okay, and you haven't undertaken it.
I've not undertaken it.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Next point. It's turn to your late evidence document, please. Forgive me. No, here it is. Right. Now, what I understand you're doing here is you have referred to a figure of somewhere between 460 and 726 cremations as effectively being diverted from Rose Hill to Retford.
Yeah, a combination of the two crematoria.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the 726 figure has been examined by Mr. Best in his rebuttal to the late evidence, and he's explained why it's not a realistic figure and not one that he uses. Indeed, it's not in fact based upon the number of cremations taking place within Rose Hill, or the catchment area of Rose Hill. It's based on the effectively the capacity of the Retford crematoria. But he can be asked about all that in due course. I'm not going to ask you about that. It's not, this 726 figure isn't your figure. It's at best a figure that emanates from the Montague Evans need statement, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to ask you about your figure of 460. And what you, the way you have got to that figure is explained in your email of the 12th of October, isn't it?
Yes.
We went through this to a certain extent yesterday, and I said I'd come back to it, and that's where I'm coming back to it right now. And what you're saying is you invited the inspector's attention to your main proof of evidence at figure 20. Yeah?
Yes. Good boy.
Was that intended for me?
If you can, yes, it could be if you wish. I've got a furry friend here.
And what figure 20 says is you've taken effectively 2,081 cremations within the MDC, or what you refer to as the natural catchment area. In other words, what you're saying is this is what Rose Hill should be doing based upon the MDC.
Yes, purely upon that, and of course without any consideration of rebalancing.
And without any consideration of rebalancing. And what you then do is you say, in fact, Rose Hill is doing considerably more than that. It's
Yes.
doing an average of 2,541 in the 3 years 2016 to 2018. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and you say, well, in fact, it's doing 460 cremations more than one would expect it to do, simply based upon a mathematical calculation based on population and death rates.
Yes.
Okay, so far so good. I understand where the figure comes from. How does it follow that 460 will or should be attributed to Barnby Moor and Babworth?
Well, I don't know where else they went. The number of deaths in the catchment local authorities feeding into Rose Hill didn't really change, but their cremations dropped in 2019, and let's have a look.
Well, hang on a moment. Let's just take this. I'm the slowest ship in the convoy here, so just take it stage by stage to explain your reasoning, please. Just pretend that I'm the dunce in Mr. Robson's GCSE maths class. So just take me through this line by line. You say that on a mathematical calculation, the figure ought to be 2081, but surprise, surprise, the actual cremations taking place at Rose Hill on average over a 3-year period is 2,541, some 460 more than you would otherwise expect.
Yes.
Why? So those cremations actually took place at Rose Hill. Okay.
Yes.
So why is it that we should assume that those 460 cremations suddenly should be transferred to Babworth or Barnby Moor?
Well, that's my point. They're not suddenly transferred. What I'm saying is the new crematoria at Retford, the 2 new crematoria, were not open and running until the first one opened mid-2018, so it's too soon to have much effect at all.
Yeah.
So the 2,081 cremations is a figure that is derived from the drive time catchment analysis that tells me the number of deaths within the minimum drive time catchment of Rose Hill Crematorium,
Yes.
as it's now been shrunk by the new crematoria's catchments burgeoning up from the south. They've pushed back the catchment, the southern area of the catchment of Rose Hill. They've reduced the catchment population, the catchment deaths. I don't know, I haven't got any mapping to show that, but it's quite clear that the building of the 2 new crematoria, they're going to have a minimum drive time catchment, they're sharing it. So suddenly in 2019, Rose Hill begins to drop. It doesn't drop by 460, the calculated figure. It dropped by 162.
Yeah.
And my thesis is that that 162 represents the early impact of the new crematoria being built, the early impact of the reduction in the size of the catchment area of Rose Hill Crematorium. And that, in keeping with a trend that is observable when you build a new crematorium, it takes a few years for the crematorium to become established and mature. I think patterns of trading mature, I think that's the description. And so I would anticipate that as the next few years pass, if we ignore COVID, their influence will grow. They will do more cremations from their own minimum drive time catchments. And Rose Hill will continue to lose cremations. Now, this was my thesis, and I've checked with the operators of Babworth Crematorium and Barnby Moor Crematorium, and they advised me that they are receiving quite a few cremations from Doncaster, from funeral directors on the south side of Doncaster. And I thought it improper for me to give out any numbers, that you should, that Mr. Jameson Hodgson, I believe, would be prepared to advise of how many cremations have taken place at Barnby Moor.
Well, what does he tell you? Well, I mean, you've obviously had a discussion with Mr. Jameson, Mr. Hodgson about this. What does he tell you?
I think he referred to a figure of 200 or more, but I don't know which year that was. So that's my point, that looking at the levels of business and capacity at Rose Hill in 2019, and that is no longer representative of what is going to happen over the next few years. The numbers of cremations at Rose Hill will continue to decline as these two new crematoria become established. And furthermore, when Barnby Dun opens, and again, it won't necessarily be overnight, but within a few years, that will be attracting its full complement of cremations from its minimum drive time catchment, which are calculated at whatever cremation rate you want to use from the numbers of deaths within those catchment areas. So that, again, without any rebalancing, the combined impact of 3 new crematoria, Barnby Dun obviously is much closer to Rose Hill than the other 2, but the other 2 do shrink the catchment area of Rose Hill. So you've got 3 brand new crematoria encroaching upon the established minimum drive time catchment of Rose Hill crematorium, shrinking it significantly to the point that if all of the crematoria are simply doing the cremations from their minimum drive time catchment, Rose Hill will be a much quieter crematorium to the extent that its capacity levels will drop below the 80% threshold. And therefore, the idea that we need a 4th new crematorium to meet the overcapacity working of Doncaster, I think, is a false premise. I don't think Rose Hill needs any further than the 3 new crematoria. It doesn't need a 4th new crematorium.
You made that point a number of times in your evidence, and I've got to say that really is a paradigm of the difficulties that advocates get in trying to give accurate indications of their cross-examination times. I'm not going to be able to finish, unfortunately, this cross-examination before 1 o'clock if you give lengthy answers like that. I'm not trying to.
I'm sorry.
I'm not being difficult. I just need to tell the inspector that that's how it is, I'm afraid. And I was careful not to interrupt. But I want to. There are a number of things I've got to do to unpack what you've just said. The first is that, as I said earlier on this morning, yes, it is obviously the case that Retford will be benefiting at the moment from some cremations which would otherwise take place at Rose Hill, for no other reason that Rose Hill is trading its socks off, isn't it?
It's very busy, yes.
Yeah. And inevitably, it's an example of why people have to go further afield in order to get their loved ones cremated, because Rose Hill is trading too much.
Indeed, it is.
Yeah. So, and then you say this, and I have to say that this is a very, very, very important caveat that you entered. You said, well, there will be that Barnby Moor and Babworth will take a lot of those and continue to take a lot of the Rose Hill cremations. You said, leaving aside the issue of rebalancing, leaving aside the issue of rebalancing.
Yes, based purely upon
the
extent of catchment areas.
But that's not the right approach.